Good afternoon, neighbor. We're glad that you're here to join us for a wilderness wildlife, a little bit of a different format. But if you were back in the day and you'd ridden in on your horse or your wagon, we'd tell you to lighten hitch. What that means is just get off the horse, come on in the house, tie her up, and we'll have a little bit of fun together. We'll talk and have some music, but we're glad that you're here. Kathy and I are delighted to be part of Wilderness Wildlife, and we sure appreciate our city for what they're doing to make this possible. So we'd like to sing Y'all Come, and and when you can, I hope you will. It goes like this. When you live in the country, everybody is your neighbor. On this one thing you can rely. They'll all come and see you. They'll never ever leave you, saying, y'all come and see us by and by. Y'all come, y'all come. Oh, y'all come and see us when you can. Y'all come, oh, y'all come and see us now and then. Our kinfolks are coming, they're coming by the dozen and eating everything from soup to hay. We'll ride after dinner, they ain't looking any thinner, but this is what you'll hear them say. Y'all come, oh, y'all come and see us when you can. Y'all come, oh, y'all come and see us now and then. Grandma's wishing they'd come into the kitchen and help do the dishes right away. When they all start leaving, well, even though she's grieving, you can still hear Grandma say, y'all come, oh, y'all come and see us when you can. Y'all come, oh, y'all come and see us now and then. Oh, y'all come and see us now and then. Oh, and we hope you'll come see us as soon as you can and enjoy these beautiful Smoky Mountains. I want to do a song about a little old log cabin that goes like this. Well, I'm getting old and feeble, I cannot work no more. My rusty bladed hoe I've laid to rest, and my mama and my papa, they are sleeping side by side, while the spirits now are roaming with the lead. Oh, the chimney's falling down and the roof is caving in, letting in the sunshine and the rain. And the only friend I have left is this good old dog of mine, in the little old log cabin in the lane. Now the dearest times to me was not many years ago. My friends all used to gather round the door. They would sing and dance all night while I played my old banjo, but alas, I cannot play it anymore. Oh, the chimney's falling down and the roof is caving in, letting in the sunshine and the rain. And the only friend I have left is this good old dog of mine, in the little old log cabin in the lane. Well, I ain't got long to stay here, what little time I've got, I'll try to rest content while I remain, until death shall call this dog and me to find another home than the little old log cabin in the lane. Oh, the chimney's falling down and the roof is caving in, letting in the sunshine and the rain. And the only friend I have left is this good old dog of mine, in the little old log cabin in the lane. I got a couple of moonshine songs for you. You may remember right off of the Andy Griffith Show, the Darlings would come into town and they do this little tune. It goes like this. Dooley was a good old boy, he lived below the mill. Dooley had 2 daughters and a 40-gallon stick. One gal watched the boy while the other watched the spout, and mama corked those bottles and old Dooley fetched them out. Dooley slipped up a holler, Dooley trying to make a dollar. Dooley, give me a smaller and I'll pay you back someday. The revenuers came for him, slipping through the woods. around and cry. Now Dooley's on a mountain, he lies there all alone. They put a jug beside him and a barrel for his stone. Dooley's living up holler, Dooley, trying to make a dollar. Dooley, give me a smart, I'll pay you back someday. Now you may remember that one. Now this is another one you might remember. It goes like this. A term for moonshine, Mountain Dew. There's an old holler tree down the road here where you lay down $1 or two. When you go round the bend and come back again, there's a jug full of good old Mountain Dew. Well, they call it that old Mountain Dew, and them that refuse her. I will shove my mug if you fill up my jug with that good old Mountain Dew. Now my Uncle Mort, he's sawed off and short. He stands about 4'2", but he thinks he's a giant when you give him a pint of that good old Mountain Dew. Well, they call it that old Mountain Dew, and them that refuse it do. I'll just shove my mug if you'll fill up my jug with that good old Mountain Dew.
Well, the first story I shared about Hub Hyde's uncles were obviously the big moonshine makers. So now let's talk about his uncles on his mama's side, the Baptist preachers. You know, one of Hub's uncles, his name was Uncle Lige, and he was coming to do revival services at the Rock Creek Primitive Baptist Church of Windy Gap, North Carolina. And you know, it was Sunday after church, and Hub noticed, of course, that they were having their traditional Sunday meal, which was fried chicken. Every Sunday after church, they would have fried chicken, so Hub didn't really think much about it. But then they went to revival services on Monday night. And Hub liked going to revival services. He said that's where he did some of his very, very best courting. He'd come early and he'd leave late. Well, he noticed that Mama had made fried chicken once again on Monday night. Well, I guess it's because we got company, didn't think too much more about it. But then Tuesday night, lo and behold, here they were having fried chicken once again. And, well, little Hub, he couldn't contain himself anymore. And he blurted out to his Uncle Lige, he said, "Why is it we're having chicken again?" He said, "How long do you expect this revival to last?" And his uncle said, "Well, Hub, I can't rightly tell you. It just all depends on when the Spirit stops moving." Well, he informed his uncle, he says, "Well, you better hurry up because we don't have a lot of chickens left." So, sure enough, that night was their last night of revival. Didn't take his uncle long to figure this one out. And so, but Hub sort of liked having revivals. He said, "I maybe wasn't getting saved, but I sure was eating good." And you know, the chicken stopped frying and the Spirit stopped moving the very next evening. Well, people at Rock Creek Primitive Baptist Church enjoyed his Uncle Lige so much that they thought it would be very, very good if he would be willing to come to Rock Creek and be our permanent full-time preacher. So they asked Hub's uncle, and he agreed to do that. Well, one of the first things that Uncle Lige decided he would do was start having communion. And they would open it up to the entire community of Windy Gap. It was a very, very big event. It happened once a year on a Sunday night, always in the fall. And people, even children, and people who had never been to church for a whole year would show up for communion at Rock Creek Primitive Baptist Church. You know why? Rock Creek was the only Baptist church around these parts that was actually serving grape wine, not grape juice. You see, Hub had lots of relatives, and you know, he had a cousin, Tom, who had grape arbors. So every year when it was time for communion, his cousin, would come and he would bring his wine, his grape wine. Well, this year was no different. Uncle Lige is the pastor. You know what? He says, okay, Tom, we're ready if you want to get your 2-gallon bucket and the gourd dipper. And that's what the entire congregation used. 1 gourd dipper. It would start with the pastor, and then it would go up and down, every row from front to back. Well, Tom was called up to bring the grape wine, and he said, I'm sorry, Pastor. I should have told you, but we had a very, very bad summer, and my grapes didn't hit this year, and I have absolutely no wine for our communion. You could have heard a pin drop. And then, all of a sudden, the entire congregation let out this very, very low groan. Actually, more like a moan. Why were we here? There's no grape wine. We'll have to come back next year. Well, luckily, Hub had another uncle who attended church at Rock Creek, and that was Uncle Fi. And he said, no worries. I have some wine. I live right next door. I'll go get my bucket and we'll have some. And so the pastor said, okay, go to it, get it as fast as you can. And when he brought in his 2-gallon wooden bucket, he went right up to the pastor and he gave him a full gourd dipper of that wonderful wine. Well, when the pastor was done having some, then they passed it up and down every aisle. Everybody drank out of that one dipper. But Hub, being a young boy again, could not help but notice what was happening to the people who had sampled some of that wine. Because Uncle Fi never told what the wine was made out of. But he did notice the pastor's face. And he kept watching very intently. And he noticed that more and more the mouth of the pastor was moving further and further to the right. And by the time it was time for the pastor to talk, his mouth was directly under his right ear. And then he started looking around. People were puckering up, but not to do kissing. They were puckering up and their lips were getting sore and their faces were flinching. Now listen, the pastor said to Uncle Fi, I believe this is not grape wine. What did you make this wine with? He said, oh, I just used some green persimmons. Well, that answered the question for the whole congregation as their faces started puckering up. And the pastor really wasn't sure what to do, but he said, well, considering the condition of my flinching flock in front of me, I was going to have us close with one last song. It was called Whispering Hope. But under the condition, we will all just leave the church whistling a tune. That's the night Whispering Hope became Whistling Hope at the Rock Creek Primitive Baptist Church.
Why don't we do some of those songs we might have heard in those little old churches back years ago? I think it'd be just fine where you're sitting to sing along with me. You'll know this one goes like this. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me. It will take us all to heaven. It will take us all to heaven. It will take us all to heaven. It's good enough for me. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me. It was good for Paul and Silas. It was good for Paul and Silas. It was good for Paul and Silas. It's good enough for me. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me. It will do when I am dying. It will do when I am dying. It will do when I am dying. It's good enough for me. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me. Good. I want to do one. Kathy talked about kin and family. This is a good song that reminds me a lot of the mountain people. It goes like this. I remember when I was a lad, times were hard and things were bad. There's a silver lining behind every cloud. Just poor people, that's all we were, trying to make a living out of black land dirt. We'd get together in the family circle, singing loud. My daddy sang bass, mama sang tenor, me, little brother would join right in there. Singing seems to help a troubled soul. One of these days, and it won't be long, I'll rejoin them in a song. We'll get together in the family circle in a little while. Oh no, the circle won't be broken by and by, Lord, by and by. There's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. I remember after work, Mama would call in on us, and you could hear us singing 4 country miles. Now little brother's done gone on, I'll rejoin them in a song. We'll get together in the family circle around the throne. My daddy sang bass, mama sang tenor, me and little brother would join right in there. Singing seemed to help a troubled soul. One of these days, and it won't be long, I'll rejoin them in a song. We'll get together in the family circle in a little while. Oh no, the circle won't be broken by and by, Lord, by and by. There's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky.
Well, I want to talk about Christmas in the mountains for just a moment for Hub Hyde. And I've talked about uncles and aunts. And now we want to take just a minute and talk about grandmas. And then Mike's going to come a little later and share a couple songs about grandmas and grandpas. But you know, Hub, as a young boy, he was always so excited because every year around Christmas time, his Grandma Gooch would come visit. And one of the things that he noticed is she stayed every year exactly 7 days It was never ever no more, never any less. 7 days. But you see, Grandma Gooch, like most mountain ladies, she'd have to travel to their little cabin by way of foot. And she didn't even have luggage to bring. She didn't have a satchel, a suitcase, anything at all to be carried with her. So in order to stay those 7 days, Grandma Gooch had a plan. Pretty resourceful, actually. She literally packed herself. The first day that she would arrive on the front porch, she'd have on all 7 dresses. Pretty warm way to travel when you have to walk in the winter. But she'd get into her little room, and then she'd take off 6 of those dresses, and each day of the week, she would wear one of those different dresses. So at the end of the 7 days, when it was time to go once again, she'd have all 7 dresses on, and she had packed herself and was ready to go home. Well, the next year, when Hub's mother announced that it was almost time for Grandma Gooch's Christmas visit once again, he knew he'd probably get in trouble for saying this, but he couldn't resist. He said, "Oh, Mama, you must mean my Grandma Snow White and her 7 dwarfs." So, Christmas in the Mountains with Hub Hyde.
These are some of my favorite songs because they're about some of my favorite people, and that'd be what Kathy just talked about, Grandma and Grandpa. So I want to do a Grandpa song for you first. It goes like this. Many, many years ago, when I was 23, I was married to a widow who was pretty as could be. This widow had a grown-up daughter who had hair of red. My father fell in love with her, and soon they two were wed. Well, this made my dad my son-in-law and really changed my life. Because now my daughter was my mother, because she was my father's wife. To complicate the matter, even though it brought me joy, soon became the father of a bouncing baby boy. My little baby then became a brother-in-law to Dad, and so became my uncle, though it made me very sad. For if he were my uncle, then that also made him brother to the widow's grown-up daughter, who was of course my stepmother. Father's wife then had a son who kept them on the run. He became my grandchild, for he was my daughter's son. My wife is now my mother's mother, and it makes me blue, because although she is my wife, she's my grandmother too. Now if my wife is my grandmother, then I'm her grandchild. And every time I think of it, it drives me nearly wild, because now I have become the strangest case you ever saw. As husband of my grandmother, I am my own grandpa. I'm my own grandpa. I'm my own grandpa. It sounds funny, I know, but it really is so. I'm my own grandpa. There's my grandpa song. Let me do a grandma song for you. This is one of my favorite, because when I was a kid, I used to get to spend a lot of time with my grandma, and it goes like this. Well, I went to live with Grandma when I was just a kid. If someone ever needed someone, I'm someone who did. She loved Grandpa and Jesus with plenty love to spare, and she told me all about it in her big old rocking chair. I learned about Jesus in my grandma's rocking chair. Sometimes when I'm troubled, I wish that I was there. For when she sang of his sweet love, I didn't have a care. I learned about Jesus in Grandma's rocking chair. I used to love to hear her hum as she worked through the day. And each night at bedtime, I'd love to hear her pray. She told me all about heaven, waiting way up there, and I first felt that feeling in Grandma's rocking chair. I learned about Jesus in my grandma's rocking chair, and sometimes that I was there. For when she sang of his sweet love, I didn't have a care. I learned about Jesus in Grandma's rocking chair. I learned about Jesus in my grandma's rocking chair. Come and sit by the side of your mother, my boy. You have only a moment, I know, but stay till I give you this parting advice. It is all that I have to bestow. Hold fast to the right, hold fast to the right, wherever your footsteps may roam. Forsake not the way of salvation, my boy, that you learned from your mother at home. You leave us to seek your employment, my boy, by the world you have yet to be tried. But in the temptations and trials you meet, may your heart to the Savior reside. Hold fast to the right, hold fast to the right, wherever your footsteps may roam. Forsake not the way of salvation, my boy, that you learned from your mother at home. You will find in your satchel a Bible, my boy. It's a book of all others the best. It will help you to live and prepare you to die, and will lead to the gates of the blessed. Hold fast to the right, hold fast to the right, wherever your footsteps may roam. Forsake not the way of salvation, my boy, that you learned from your mother at home. I want to do a little hymn that you might know. It's a beautiful song. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus. If you know this, sing with me, would you? 'Tis so sweet